Lunch and Learn, Wednesday, October 28, 2015. Brendan Hennessy. So I'm going to give a little lunch and learn on a little bit about JavaScript, a little bit about React, and a little bit about React in Rails. And I'm going to go through things pretty quickly. I'm going to address some specific things that actually Paul brought up because he wanted to see how forms work in React and Rails. But I wanted to start just by talking about JavaScript real quick in general to explain a couple things, because I will say some words and you guys may not know what they mean or what the impact is on us. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is something called ES6. And this is basically the new, the newest release of JavaScript. So just like Ruby went from 1.9.3 to Ruby 2, that's basically the same thing. ES6 is the newest version of JavaScript. It's called ES6 because ES stands for ECMA script, which is the real name of JavaScript. I don't know why there's a difference, but that is the thing. And ECMA script 6, or ES6, is basically the same thing as ECMA script 2015. And those are the same things. There's a big deal about this because it adds a lot of functionality to JavaScript that wasn't there by default before, but has been provided through other libraries. People use underscore or Lodash to have a lot of like these kind of extra functions. A lot of those things are kind of included in ES6 JavaScript. There's also new ways to declare variables and a lot of other things I'm not going to get into, but when we do get into the JavaScript portion, I am going to be using ES6, so there may be some things that you haven't seen before, and I'll try to explain to make more sense. In addition, what you've seen now is right now it's been accepted, but the adoption for ES6 things is hit or miss. So Chrome adopts certain things and doesn't adopt others right now. Same with Firefox and whatever. They're all different. In reality, you've been able to use ES6 syntax, the whole thing, for a while, thanks to things called transpilers. And what they do is it's extra JavaScript that basically looks at your ES6 JavaScript and turns it into ES5 JavaScript. So all browsers know what to do with it. Okay? And so if you're using one of these transpilers and you get to write ES6, and then it's browser friendly for everybody. Okay? And that's basically what we do. So there's one called Babel. It's everywhere. Not only does it do ES6, it also includes the React specific language that I'll show you in a second called JSX. But basically what Babel does, if I load Babel, or I do a step before bringing the JavaScript to the browser to transpile ES6 into ES5 and whatever, so I don't have to worry about the browser compatibility issues. Does that make sense to people? Okay, perfect. So that being said, I'm going to talk a little bit about React, and what we're going to do is we're going to build a really important feature of Stack Overflow to basically manage our user preferences. So Stack Overflow, just like Stack Overflow, allows you to post questions about snacks and people can answer them. So you can see that there's a few top questions here. If I click on that, I can see, okay, here's a couple proposed answers. I haven't implemented the voting functionality. And if I was logged in, I could actually answer it, but I'm not going to let you do it if you're not logged in. And it's the same thing here. I can't ask a question unless I'm logged in. So let's log in. This is, devise, good stuff. All right. Uh-oh. Oh, yeah. It's going to be a bad lunch and learn. The password, in case you were wondering, is password. Okay, so now I'm back on the main page here, and now if I wanted to, I can ask a question. So maybe I'll do that. I don't know, almond joy. Where is the joy? And if I submit, it actually adds it to the list and gives you a little green highlight. Okay, so what you're looking at is a React Rails application. And what that means is Rails is handling the normal things, navigation, all that stuff is being rendered through Rails. each individual view is actually a React component, and then inside that I deal with React. You saw some Ajax there. We can do it again. You know, and that's posting to the server and getting the newest ones, and the new one is highlighted, so I know that it's there. If we were to do something really special here, some extra magic. We're not using Meteor, but we can still do some stuff that's pretty cool. So that was pretty fast. That was actually lucky because I think it's polling every 30 seconds or something. So it shouldn't have been that fast. But anyways, we are polling, so this is live refreshing, and I'm just doing this in React and Rails, no Meteor necessary.
Were the pages page refresh when you clicked on a show page?
If I navigate the URL, it's going to be a page refresh because it's using all Rails server-side rendering.
No React.
No client routing.
You just haven't done it, or you just think you have it.
So this was modeling on what we had decided to do for dispute bills, which was again Rails server-side routing, and React on the page. And so that's what this is. So all page navigation is purely Rails.
It's purely what?
It's purely Rails. Okay. So what we're going to do is right now, if I try to go to my account, oh no, I can't do anything to manage my account. So this is what we're going to build. We're going to try to actually build something to manage the account. So I've already set this up. So we actually have data for people's preferences already in the system, and I have a model. So if I just pop open the schema real quick, I have preferences for a user, and basically that's just display name, notify on answer. So every time someone answers, it'll send them an email, and whether to get a daily digest or not. None of these things are actually implemented, but these are the sorts of things that we might expect. And since Paul wanted to make a form, that's what we're going to do. So this is already here. There's already some data there. I'm kind of skipping some of the Rails stuff, but I created an accounts controller. I have an edit action that's going to bring up that page that you just saw, and of course an update action that's going to allow us to update the preferences. Okay. So I already got us started a little bit here, but you see I have this render component. Okay. And so when we're doing React Rails, we have a couple options for rendering React components. What I'm doing here is actually rendering it straight from the controller. And what this actually does is it pre-renders the component, so it actually generates the component on the server and sends the whole thing to the client. So effectively just like ERB, right? Created on the server, rendered on the server, sent to the client. It can provide some optimizations if there was a lot of data that we had to do or whatever. This can do it for us. I'm not going to get into all the details right now, but that's what we're going to do here. It's kind of cool. Alternatively, I could render an ERB page and just include my components on that page as well, but I'm not going to do here. So a couple things just to notice before we get into it. This is really simple. This is the name of the component. This props hash is basically all the data that I'm going to send with my component. Okay, and you're seeing something here, which I'm basically using my active model serializer and using that to actually control what's rendered to the client. If I didn't do that, it's just going to 2JSON the whole object, and I want to control what's actually being rendered. What if there's sensitive information there? Whatever, I'm going to do that. So that's why I'm doing this right here. And we've talked about kind of the impact of this and whether we want to follow this route, but that's how this works right now.
So you've like set up serializers and...
Yeah, so I have a preference serializer here that just says, okay, well, these are the attributes I want from the preference model, right? I have a couple extra ones that I have a bunch of them, which I'm not using here, but they were kind of left over from some other ones.
It basically allows you to modify the
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, which is important because everything that I send to this component is going to get rendered on the page. They may not see it, but it's there. So we want to be careful about what we send. Okay, so what we need is an accounts edit React component. And this is where the fun comes in, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one.
Can I interject real quick?
Yeah.
What happens if you go to this page now and that component doesn't exist?
We're going to get a big failure.
Or is it
This will be a Rails failure. So
okay?
you're going to get kind of your standard whatever. So the error messages when you do render from the server are worse. In this case, basically, if there's an error anywhere in that component, it's going to highlight the component here. And it's going to give you a somewhat usable error message, but it doesn't really tell you where it happened. This is a pretty good one. But in general, I found the error messages to be better if you render on the client. Because then you get the console log, the actual JavaScript one. So it's a little whatever. But
So if you render the HTML, it will just show like a blank page basically.
if I render as HTML, I mean just the individual components. You can pre-render too in ERB if you want to, but like again, if you pre-render it, you're going to get an error like this because it's before it sends it back to the client. If you don't pre-render and there's a JavaScript error, you're just going to get that error on the client like a normal JavaScript.
So what you're saying is if we have an error in our accounts edit component,
Yep.
like in that component,
Yep.
when we render it, this is what we'll see.
Yep.
Which isn't helpful at all because we won't.
I mean, you'll get more than is not defined. You'll actually get an error message.
Okay.
You will get an actual error message.
Okay.
Your mic's right there.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna move this over here. Maybe I'll just not eat right now. You will get a better error. You get some sort of error message, but it doesn't necessarily tell you where. It doesn't highlight where it's happening in your component. This is as far as the stack trace goes. So it just says here, this component, something went wrong, and it tells you what, but it doesn't tell you where. So it's kind of annoying. So let's actually make our component so we don't have an error. So I'm going to make it here. I'm going to call this accounts edit. And I'm calling it this because this is what the React Rails generator calls it. But really, as long as it ends in .jsx, it's okay. I'm calling it .es6.jsx, but it doesn't really matter.
Where'd you put that?
I just put it in views. It's right here.
JavaScript component view.
Yeah, so React Rails, I don't want to get into all of it, but it creates a components folder. It creates another manifest called components.js. And so this is basically everything you need to render those components. Okay? Why is it?
The El Capitan, Big Mouse. Yeah.
Oh. So anyways, this has some impact on like how you manage your dependencies and stuff, because if you want to pre-render anything on the server, it has to be included in this components.js. What's that? Not just in the application.js, which is still there. So the application.js is including components, and then components is going to include all this other stuff. I will explain these in a moment. Okay, so great, accounts edit. Now, let's make a React component. So here I'm going to use the ES6 way of doing this. Ryan will love it. This is my accounts edit component, and it extends React component. Okay, now we have a component. Everything in this situation, all the React stuff is available globally, which is kind of nice. And actually, if this doesn't break, it should just be blank or something. All right, so sorry, we need the basics.
Every component needs a render.
Yeah.
At least.
So React, we'll get into that, but I will talk about React. I don't know. Let's just do this for now. I just wanted to show you something else. So because React is available globally, you can actually, see it in the console. So if I were to fire this up, right, I can actually look at React, right? So here's React, everything that's there. So I'm using React component, right, is extending. Everything is available in the console here. And in addition, I actually did the React Dev Tools, which is also kind of cool. So you can actually look at the React stuff that I'm rendering right here is a React component questions index and all that stuff. So it's kind of helpful for debugging. It tells you all this stuff. So it's really nice. Way better than the Angular one. Okay, so here's our component. So like Brendan said, the first thing that we need is every React component has a render method. You're telling this is what you actually want to render to the screen, right? So this is where your HTML goes. And what you'll notice is that I don't have this in quotes, right? It's not in quotes. It's not a string. What this actually is this is React kind of set of JavaScript called JSX. And what it does is it includes HTML elements and React components in what's allowable to write in a JSX file. So you don't have to worry about concatenating strings and things like that. There are a couple of rules about how you use it, multiple lines and stuff like that. Generally, you'll do something like this, because anytime you're going to have a multi-line HTML thing, you got to put it in parentheses like this. The other requirement is that it actually has to have only one root element, so it would yell at me if I tried to do something like this. It has to all have one kind of big encapsulating element. These are just things about JSX. Okay. A couple other things. So this is the most important thing. This controls what this is going to render, and it should actually work. Counts edit. I'm not sure why it doesn't unless we're missing the constructor. So the other part about ES6 is we have this kind of more class-based syntax.
So you're defining a function right there, right? The function is constructor. So normally you'd have to do something like var, or you'd have to do something like accounts_edit.prototype.constructor.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is a little simpler.
Under the hood, that's basically what's going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. So the syntax is just all new. It allows us to do something. Super. That's right. So I can call super because it's extending a React component, right? So this is.
Is it super in ES6 function?
This is all ES6. Super I think but I don't know for sure.
Yeah,
I don't. So it wouldn't make sense unless it's in this context, really. So since this is all new, I would guess, but I'm not so sure. So, but basically, when you want to initialize your object, you call this constructor, and I'm just passing up the props to the top. So let's see if we can get this to work.
It's not a function.
So I don't know why that's not working.
Not sure if this relates, but in the accounts controller, what's the tag mean there?
It's just what it's going to render it as. So by default, it render as a span. But I'm just telling it to do it.
Another div on top of it.
Yeah, like there are two divs or
I
something.
mean, that shouldn't make a difference, I don't think.
Look at the question.ES6 one again.
So, I mean, this is a bigger one, but there's nothing special here. So, I'm not really sure. The only thing is maybe I have to, just in case. I don't know why that wouldn't work. This always happens during.
Our viewers are going to be upset, Dave.
Is the file in the right spot?
It's in component, which is really all that matters. So,
there we go. It worked.
No, it's thinking. Oh, okay. Yeah, so maybe I just needed to restart or something.
So every time you add a new file, you have to restart?
Yeah, I don't know. That was kind of weird. I don't remember having this issue before. But anyways, so we're not failing, and okay, maybe let's actually make it more clear that we're doing something. Right, world. And so if I were to then refresh, I should get hello world.
I might have to restart our server here.
I haven't had that problem before, so I don't know what that is. Let's get rid of this first. Okay, hello world. We did it. Very cool. Okay, so that's your first React component. So before we get into it, the way that this generally works is, again, this render method is called to, tell it what to actually render to the screen. Okay. it basically, this doesn't run continuously, but it runs more than once. It's going to run once at the beginning to kind of generate what's going to be shown on the screen. Basically, the way that React components work is you have a set of data called props that you pass in from either the parent component or, in this case, from the server. Remember how I'm passing in props? I'm passing in this preference. And then it also has its own kind of internal data store that's restricted to the component itself called state. And again, we're in control of what that is. So to show you what happens is, what I can do is, if I wanted to, I can just props. Okay, so now when render is called, it will actually show this up. Now, since I'm pre-rendering, I don't know if I'm going to see it on the console or not. But okay, so there it is. Right, we actually saw it twice. And so here are the props, right? And props, we're passing it this preference, and here we go. So this is now on the client, right? Mm-hmm. This has been passed to the client. The way this actually does this is less magical than you might think, but if you look at the React, here's the rendering of our React component. It's going to take whatever props you pass it and render it as JSON into a data attribute on the React component. And then it grabs it from there.
Back in.
Yeah, and grabs it from there. Okay, so again, this is why you want to be careful about what data you send to the client. This is very readable. So
if you're not careful with that serializer, you can pass it.
That's right. That's right. So that's why you want to serialize. But so that's how it works.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. But it's the same thing with Angular. Like if you do ng-init or whatever it is, you're sending that data with it, but then it still has to get it from the client, right? We don't want to have to make another AJAX request. So I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly. So you saw we have props, and then there's also something called state. And this is something that a component uses kind of internally. And again, it's just a hash. And this is available as well. So I could also do a console.log this.state. And if I go back, I'm going to get both of those, right?
Is there an ES6 notation instead of this dot? Add or something?
I don't think so. What do you mean?
Like in Backbone, you can do @ and then you say it, and it calls this dot.
There's something.
I thought there was something ES6 with that, but that's okay.
I know that's in CoffeeScript. There might be something in JavaScript. So now we got there might be. I don't know.
That's fine.
So now we have the props, which has this preference, and we also have state. Okay. And the way that this works is this render function gets called, like you said, at the beginning to generate what's going to be shown on the page. It also gets called in two other situations. One is whenever the props change. So imagine a parent component changing the data that it's sending to its children. Okay. The other situation is when its internal state changes, so when state changes. And basically this is how I'm initializing state, but if you were to do something, you would say set state blah, okay? So imagine we did something like this. Okay, in JSX, this is how you reference JavaScript stuff outside of here. So I get to reference things, that's in this class by putting them in a single bracket, okay? And the reference to this just references to my object.
Does it embed into the actual HTML then? Or
Yeah. So you'll see what that is, right? So if I render this again, you should see hello world, bar or whatever.
That's how you interpolate dynamic content.
That's how you interpolate. Is there like a non-interpolation version, kind of like, like the squiggly with the percent instead of the two squigglies? So if you wanted to do like an if statement, so you don't want the thing that renders from the if to be embedded into the HTML.
This is gonna run this JavaScript, right?
So it's going to return whatever's returned from that will get embedded in.
Yeah. So
you can
and
just
you actually
return nil.
you can't run an if statement inside of the curlies here.
Mm.
You can do a ternary, so I could do foo, whatever, like that, right? But I can't run a full if statement, so this doesn't support all of JavaScript. Generally, if you need to do some complex
function.
logic, you put it outside and just call the
Call
function.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna do some magic. So basically, a React component has a life cycle, okay, and I will pull up the docs here for it. But basically, it goes through a bunch of steps in this life cycle, and you can kind of hook up into those things. So you talked about the render method, but basically, there's all these different life cycle events that happen. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Basically, it goes through these processes each time. So component will mount happens before the component is rendered on the screen. Okay. So if you need to do some initial setup, you can do it there. And essentially in ES6, we actually don't have to implement that. Anything that happens in the constructor is effectively happening as the component will mount. Okay, so this stuff happens before the component, before the HTML is actually rendered to the DOM. Okay, after it mounts, it calls component did mount, which is again where you're going to kind of want to do some additional setup, but after it's been rendered to the page. Okay, and then other lifecycle events dealing with, okay, there's new props coming. I can call this before I receive the props with like the next set of props. Should the component update actually is like, okay, well, I've received the props and the state has changed. Should I actually run the render function? And you can control this a little bit. And there is a difference between rendering on the page in the DOM and rendering just in JavaScript. Basically, every time props or state changes, it calls the JavaScript render function. It only changes the DOM if something changes after that. So you don't always see those changes, but it's still rendering, it's still running that function behind the scenes every time that changes. Okay, so you can actually be more efficient. If you have like a large render function, you can say, okay, well, did the props change? Did the state change? No, then don't even run. Then don't run the render function. That can save you some cycles just on the JavaScript side. You could get some important performance improvement that way. When it's decided that the component's actually going to update, okay, after the component updated and before it's removed from the DOM. Okay, and these are all different places. Now, actually,
these are equivalent to callbacks in Rails, right? Before update,
that's right.
After update.
That's right. So if you wanted to add something in, let's say, the component did mount, right? I just do it there. Okay, now I have component did mount, and whatever I want to put in here is going to run right after the component mounts.
No?
Why would I want to call super?
Oh, okay, so this is just a hook.
Yep,
okay.
Just a hook. So I'm going to do something fun, and we're going to show some magic. So let's say I want to show you guys what happens when the state changes, right? So what I can do is this.
So does it mount and unmount once, and then it just does will update
Yes.
for like state changes or prop
That's right.
changes?
That's right. It only mounts once.
Do I see a hash rocket?
So yeah. So this is how you update the state. Okay. And we'll do this in what 2 seconds. Okay. So and component did mount is generally the place where you want to do these, set these things up, right? And basically, so I'll show you what this does. So this is new syntax. So normally you would do something like function foo and then like that. ES6 gives you kind of the shortened version, and it's number one, it's simpler, obviously, but number two, it actually is a little bit different. When you use this function syntax, whatever is meant by this actually changes when you create a new function. When you use the other syntax, it does not change what this is. So this now still refers to the class. If I did it with the function, it would refer to the function, which is now what we want. So you'd have to do something like
Compare this equal that.
yeah, exactly. You either do that, you do, whatever. Anyways, you guys get it. Or you could pass it in, or you could bind it, whatever. But you have to deal with that, and we don't like to deal with that. So
So in general, you're being probably more explicit than you used to be versus like it could get really hairy what this is referring to.
Yeah, exactly. So this I know I'm still referring to the kind of the outside thing. So hopefully,
So set timeout. Where are you getting that function from?
SetTimeout is a globally available JavaScript thing.
It's a JavaScript.
Yeah, that is not React. So SetTimeout to do something at delay, right, is just JavaScript.
Oh, it calls it on the window, right?
It's available globally. So if I do this, hopefully what should happen is you're going to see bar, and then a little bit later it's going to change to foo because the state changed. Okay, so now we have bar. Let's see what happens. Oh, it's foo.
Whoa.
It worked. So what happened, right? 2 seconds later, okay, I called setState and changed what state.foo is. So when I called setState, it knows I need to call the render function again.
So shouldn't it have called component did mount a second time?
It only mounts once
On the original load.
So yeah, that is like the initial. I'm putting this on the page. Will mount and did mount only get called once. Okay. Again, this is happening effectively in the will mount, so before it mounts, and this is happening after it mounts. This is actually important as we're using it in Rails because when I pre-render, it's going through the will mount stuff. Okay. That's where it stops. Okay. Component did mount is only going to get called once it's on the client. And this is actually important because if I were to do something that was only available in the browser here, okay, if SetTimeout isn't available on the server, which I don't know if it is or not, I think it's just JavaScript, so I think it would be fine. But if I was doing something that needed the window or needed something that the browser was providing, it would break if I put it in the will mount and I tried to render it on the server, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I can actually show you an example of this too. Generally, what you're going to want to do if you did SetTimeout is you're going to want to clean up after yourself. And so this is what I do in like when I'm polling on like the questions index page. So what this does is instead of doing SetTimeout, I'm using setInterval. So this says, okay, every 5 seconds, I guess I was doing 30 seconds, every 5 seconds call this function, okay? And I do this after the component did mount, right? Now, if I then navigate away from the page, that's still running. Okay, so we want to make sure that, and then I get errors in the console because it's like you're trying to do something and this component isn't there or whatever. So basically, you make sure to keep a reference to it, and then on component, when component will unmount, I'm going to remove that, so then it doesn't keep firing after I go.
So what's the unmount? Is that just someone navigating away from the component?
Yeah, it's removed from the DOM and removed from whatever, right?
From the DOM.
Yeah. From the virtual DOM, not from the actual DOM.
The only like will mount, the only reason why that matters is because we're actually rendering this component in the controller action, right? So if we had an app that was just standalone React app, like the will mount and the mounting or whatever, or the
I'm going to stop you right there.
yeah.
No.
Help me.
Mounting is something that happens regardless.
Mounting is something that happens.
So that's whatever. Whenever your React component is being added to the page, that's mounting. Okay? Doesn't matter whether you're doing it client, server, or whatever.
So just to clarify, in this instance, we're not using React Router. You have component did mount on the page. So, for example, we're on the edit or account page. So I have this. Let's say you set the interval to like toggle food bar and so forth. If you navigate to another page because of refresh, that would be wiped away, right?
Yes.
Okay. You're talking a little more of a single page app, and you weren't really.
No, actually, I should.
You know what I'm saying? Like, wouldn't the page refresh kind of be your catch-all?
Unmount.
I think this is
So,
great. I think it's great, but I'm just saying, like, in the
if
way we're using it right now.
So here, let's get an example. I'm going to get rid of this for now.
So it will still keep running, though, is what you're saying.
Yeah, so if I'm on the index page, right, and here I had questions indexed, right, I have this timer going. So if I watch, I'm going to see in the console that, okay, this fetch is going to keep happening. People are dropping like flies.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't gotten to the interesting part, right? This fetch keeps happening, and I've got some stuff, whatever.
Yeah.
If I navigate away, so now I go to this other page, okay, it's actually still happening. it's still firing.
Okay.
So
is that because you're rendering it through the controller?
I don't know.
It's kind of funky, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
So where does that?
If I do a hard refresh, it'll get rid of it.
Interesting.
So
that might be the turbo link.
TurboLinks.
So maybe it's turbo.
It's totally TurboLinks.
TurboLinks isn't completely refactored.
Yeah.
It's only reloading.
The things that change.
You didn't get rid of TurboLinks by design, or?
I just left it
You
in.
didn't get rid of TurboLinks?
I did not. It seems that it actually works fine with TurboLinks, which is nice. But so either way,
Just to,
It's good practice.
this is the practice. This is what you want to do. Okay. So
so ideally, just one more thing. So ideally, right, like this isn't a Rails app, and it's kind of very similar to Rails, but like you could pull this out maybe into a single page app.
Yep.
And then you'd have to worry more about like the setting intervals and clearing those. So it's
Yep.
good practice versus like, okay, now we gotta rewrite everything because we're using React Router now or something.
Right. It's good practice to do that. So the next couple of things we're going to look at are, now we saw that we're passing this preference down. One thing that you can also do in React Components is a little bit of sanity checking to make sure that you're getting the right information. So just like you would validate things in Rails, you can kind of do a similar thing in React. And the syntax here is a little wonky. There's in ES7, there is better syntax for this. Okay, but for now, we would do something like this. Okay, and these prop types are basically defining, our model attributes, right? And object. Okay, so what are we doing here? This is basically just a validation on the account's edit component that its props that I pass it includes something called preference, and that is an object. Okay, everything these are things in React.prop text, but this could be bool, could be string, could be array. And generally, if it's array, you could even do like array of and like specify the object. So if I were to continue going down this road, I would probably have more of this logic built out in the client. So I might have something called preferences, like a JavaScript object called preferences, and I may say like that this is actually an object, type of or something like that. I forget the syntax, preference or something like that, which you can do. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as object. And if I were to say it's required and I didn't pass it down, okay, so let's just say I did this and I tried to render this, it should bark at me. Sure enough, required prop preference was not specified. All right, so it barks at me, which is good. So let's put it back.
That's awesome.
Now, if I refresh, hopefully it should work.
So the HTML itself now is like acting as like a model in a way, because it's like validating itself.
The component
that it has the things that it needs.
Yeah, the component. I mean, that's just JavaScript, right? So the component is going to do that and make sure.
That's something that you don't get with regular HTML.
Right.
So.
So this is kind of nice.
Yeah, true.
But remember, what we want to do here is we want this to be a form where we can actually like update our information, right? So I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm gonna copy some stuff over. But
see some inline styles.
Oh yeah, there's inline styles everywhere. So let's see, what do we actually want to return? So let's do this.
You should have left.
Maybe it was best that you did.
And there's a couple things I'm going to get rid of here. I'll explain them. Oops. Okay. Just trying to make sure that this is going to render okay. We actually don't need this guy. I don't need this guy for now. Okay, so now if we render that, we should actually get some stuff. Okay, sweet. Using the magic of Bootstrap, we have a little form here, and basically these are our preferences. Okay, so nothing special here, right? Just some, you know, Bootstrap. I got a row, I got some columns, whatever. I got some inputs, normal HTML, nothing special. Two things to notice. One is I'm using class name instead of class. That is a JSX thing. You know, when you're doing classes in JSX, you use class name instead of class.
What's ref?
I will get to that. I was going to show inline styles, but I don't have any here. So if I were to show this other page, I can show you real quick. To do inline styles, you actually specify your styles as a hash instead of like strings, right? So you do camel cased names, and this is just an object, and that's how you would specify inline styles.
Why are there two braces instead of one?
Because one is for interpolation, right, and the other is for whatever, because I'm passing this a JavaScript object, right? So the inner thing, this whole thing, right, is a JavaScript object, like a JSON.
Oh, okay,
thing,
so
right?
you're basically interpolating in a JavaScript object.
Yeah, that's right. So that's why there's doubles.
Gotcha.
I don't have any inline styles on this page, so it's good. So the other thing you noticed was ref. This is important. So when we're dealing with forms, this is very important. So there's a couple ways of doing it, but basically we're going to have to interact with the DOM somehow. And generally we're trying to avoid doing that directly. And one of the nice things that JSX and React give us is the option of putting a ref tag here. And basically this gives us a reference to this element. Okay? This means that if I were to call this.refs.displayName, that's going to refer to this input. Okay? Later on. In fact, if I want to get the value, I can do just like this. This.refs.displayName.value. Okay? We're going to use this in a second, because we're going to need to get the data from those form elements.
It's like the opposite of ng model.
So ng model puts together a two-way data binding between the form element and whatever's on your scope.
Mm-hmm.
In React, the forms are a little awkward. Okay, there is no two-way data binding. Everything is effectively a one-way flow. Okay, so what's going to happen is we have a couple ways of dealing with form elements in React, and they're basically it's either an uncontrolled form element or a controlled form element. All right. If you have an uncontrolled form element, that's basically kind of what I have right now. I just have these form elements. I can type in whatever, right? Nothing is happening, right? I'm not keeping track of this value anywhere. I didn't control what value went in there, all right? In Angular, if you want to kind of do what is done in Angular, you have to wire it up, okay? There's a couple ways to do this. I'm not going to go into the simpler one, because React actually has a little mix-in that you can use to do this for you, called like the link state helper or something. But basically, if you wanted this to be continuously updating with like your JavaScript, basically you have to add an onChange event to this input, and then get that value, and then update something in your state to that value, and then basically you're putting the value in the state. So for instance, if we were to do this, okay, let's say I like foo, so we'll do it.
Why not just change the props?
I don't have props. These aren't components.
But isn't it the preference form, and you pass preference in as a prop?
I did.
So couldn't you just modify preference, that object?
You don't touch props.
You don't touch props.
Props are things that are handed down from you from above, and you do not touch the
Gifts
props.
from God.
You do not. If you're gonna, the only thing you can change internally is state.
Okay.
Okay. You do not change props.
Couldn't I say this.state equals props.preference?
So there is something that I do in some of these controllers, which is essentially that. So in the constructor, I initialize my state from the props that are passed down. okay, and then I just update state. Okay, so that what that does is that gives me initial values passed down from the parent,
and then the updated current values.
and then the updated current value. So that's how I handle the live updating. Is I initialize props, I set state. So if I go to questions index, okay, I actually do this, right? I'm setting my state to this dot props.
Yeah.
Okay. This syntax.
Yeah, it's weird.
This is ES6 dereferencing, and so what that means is questions is going to get assigned to. So this dot props is an object, right?
Yeah.
It's going to get assigned to this dot props dot question, and user is going to get assigned to this dot props dot user. So it's a really quick way to just pull out those values.
They're just pointers, or are they actually duplicated, like different objects? So if I modify this state.questions, will that modify this props.questions?
No.
Okay, so they're different.
Yeah. And so, but that's, you can dereference like this, you can pull it out, and then I'm assigning, okay, this to state is that. So I'm just kind of initializing that, all right? So you can do that. I don't really have to do that right now, but you can do that. So, but what I want to do here is, let's say I wanted to do something, I want to keep track of the value of this input, okay? So basically I want the value of this input, right, to be equal to this dot state dot foo, right? That's what I have. So if I do this and I refresh, okay, it's barking at me, but there's a good reason for that. But here's bar, okay, but I can't change it. Can't change it. I cannot edit this field.
It's messed up.
It's messed up, right? Right?
Yeah, it's pretty messed up.
So that's the case because that input field is bound. It's bound to this value, right? And I'm not changing the value. This isn't Angular. It doesn't. Magic doesn't happen like that.
Bar.
So basically, I need to handle that change. So I'm actually, what's actually happened is I'm typing and it's typing in the input and then immediately getting replaced.
So you need to be watching as the user inputs something and changing that.
That's right. That's right. So basically what you need to do is this. Okay. On change, I have to do something. Okay? And so basically I would say, okay, well, let's see, I need a function, handle change. And in this case, I know that I'm actually getting refs.displayName.value. Foo is equal to that, right?
Yes.
Okay. Think this will work?
Yes.
That's pretty good. Check it out. And you saw it was barking at me in the errors that I didn't have a change handler. Okay, now I got no errors. Do it. Okay. It barked at me there, but that's okay. Yeah, but now I can actually do that. Okay, what's that?
This dot refs is undefined.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but anyways, so, but basically now I can actually edit the form field, right? And I know that the value in the state is going to be consistent with what's in the form field. So it's a little wonky coming from Angular, okay? But this is what's called a controlled component, controlled form element, okay? I'm in total control of what's in that field. If I were to do some validation and things like that, right, that's what I'm going to have to do, is have it controlled. I don't necessarily always need a controlled component, you know, to just do normal form stuff. I can do, let's say, in this case, like if I just set this normal edit form, I'm like, oh, I want my preferences and I want to allow them to change it and then save them, right? Just to the database. I don't actually have to have control over it like that. So the key is you don't use value, but if I want to provide a value initially, I would use default value. So that's actually. You don't have
to worry about the change for that.
That's right. So it's not controlled anymore. So it's not bound to this other thing. It's just you can put in whatever you want. So now I'll pull from the props, okay, and I don't really need this right now. And so now it's going to populate it with the preference, and I'm free to edit it. Okay, dsizzle is my name, and I'm free to edit it as I want, right? But nothing is happening, right? Nothing is getting updated. okay? And if I didn't change anything and now it's gone, I don't have it back. I'd have to refresh the page to get it again. So that's what's called an uncontrolled component, okay? So it's not totally bound to anything else. I can put in whatever I want. Really, all I want to do is be able to handle it when people are done editing it and submit it, right? That's it. So I'm going to add in the rest of this stuff, and because we're going to need to get through some of this stuff. So there's notify an answer.
So would you have something if you kind of wanted, like, one thing you can do with Angular, right, is you can reference an ng model on an input and then just reference that scope somewhere else in the view, and you get this, like, you type here and it appears over there.
So
would you do that with, like, state or something?
So that's what we did before with the controlled component. That's how you do it, right? So if I wanted to have something, you know, under preferences that was, you know, Brendan says, I'd have to. This dot state dot. What do we call it? Foo. And we did this where we just had. Okay.
So you could just, you don't have to do the controlled state to do that. You just need to have an on-change handler to update the state. You can still use the default value and then on-change update what the state is, and that should still update.
You don't, but you wouldn't do that. You would just set it. So the default value gets set once, right? But then if I want to actually maintain the state, that what's actually in there. So then if I went in there and started editing stuff and I wasn't actually binding it, if I wasn't using the value attribute, it still wouldn't update. It wouldn't change, just like we did before.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because it's, do you know what I'm saying? It's kind of weird. But if I do this again, display name dot value, and what I'm going to want, foo, what I really want is actually the initial one, right? Preference dot display name, okay.
Camel faces, maybe?
No, not the stuff that's coming from the servers.
Oh, I see.
Is Railsy. Okay, he says desizzle, and if I start typing, that should work.
This .refs is coming into the fine. It's yours, not just this .ref.
Yeah. I don't know why that's the case.
It's okay, I think you got it.
Can you console.log this .refs?
I don't know if I can see the refs. Yeah, I don't know if I can see the refs.
I just meant in the in handle change.
Refs. So, I mean, that looks to be working. Am I sure I'm not doing that?
Click on the error message. Go back to the console. You click on the error link, you should see where that's erroring out. So in the handle change, just do a console.log on this .refs. Is this changing inside of the set state function?
No.
Set var then equals this.
I've never had this issue before, so.
Restart the server?
It's blown up right now. It's also been really slow to like refresh, which it didn't really have that problem before. That's weird. I actually haven't had this issue before. So I don't really understand why that's the case.
It's something where like,
Look
you have to
at
set a
your-
default value,
Look at a different React
identifying
component.
the rest to that.
I mean, I have this whole thing that I've already done, right?
So let's look at, go up to,
You
So-
have default value on that one. I think I kind of remember reading this.
So, but I'm not using value here either. So because I'm not like, it's not a controlled component, it's an uncontrolled component.
Okay. Yeah. I thought I remember if you want to use ref, you have to set a default value.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, because here, this is an uncontrolled component, so I'm never like, I don't have like a value that I'm binding it to, so there could be something there, and maybe that's why. Either way, you should be able to do something like that. Maybe I need to use default, I don't know. But for the purposes of what we're trying to do, we actually don't need to have a controlled component. All that's important is that we are able to get the value that they type in and then submit it. So in this case, I'm not going to worry about this right now. So let's add a button.
Don't worry, we'll edit that out of the videos.
Yeah, you can edit that out. And for now,
why is the state dirty? Also,
I was doing something because I was showing and hiding the button based on, you know, whether changes had happened or not. You know, so if you'd actually change something, the button would show up, and not. We don't really need to worry about that. Right? We can just show the button. Okay, so now I have a submit button. Okay, and this one. I have these handle change events, which I'm not actually going to use now because I'm not doing the is dirty thing, so I'm just going to get rid of them. I also don't need this. But I do want value reference to display name, right? Okay, this. We don't need this. Okay, but what we do need is a. Oh, you know what I bet I did? I bet I know the answer. So I was calling, and I'll show you what happened right now. So I'm calling this .handle submit. And so theoretically I should click this and this should happen, right? I know what the problem is. I'll explain. So here's my thing, and if I hit submit, okay, I got foo. And then a bunch of stuff happened, which wasn't really great. That's actually not ideal. So the first thing we're going to do is, okay, whenever you have this right, because what happened is this submit button is actually in the form. So I did my action, then I kept going and actually tried to submit the form, which is not what I want. So I'm going to prevent default. I'm going to do something else here. This props.
I think you're going to need to return false too, right? Or will prevent default prevent.
I think, yeah, prevent default will do that.
Except that if there's a JS error before it gets the return statement, it's a little more
Okay. So I just hit submit and I got undefined. This is the problem we had before. I hit submit and I said this .props and I got undefined. Okay. I know I have props.
This is the event.
So this is supposed to be my accounts edit component. And so what I did was, and this is what I did before. So in ES6, okay, in ES5, React was smart enough to bind all of these functions to the accounts edit component, meaning setting this to the component. And actually in ES5 was able to do it in ES6, it doesn't do that automatically. So you actually have to set what this is for all of these functions. So what I generally do is in my constructor, I just say this.handle submit is actually equal to this dot handle submit dot find this. Okay. There's also more generic ways of doing it where you could actually iterate over the functions, right, and then bind them like this. But this is, I haven't had that many functions, so this is what I did. This was the issue that we had before. So this here is now going to refer to my accounts edit component and not something else. So now I should actually get the prop. So this is what was causing the prop, the this.refs undefined issue. So now if I call submit, I actually get the props. All right.
What would be your way around that if you didn't bind that? If you didn't change the state of this within the handle submit, or you just don't have access to the accounts edit class then at that point?
You don't have anything that you would normally call this. You don't have, right?
So literally you have to do that for every single function. So why wouldn't you extract that into the React.component class?
I mean, you wouldn't put it here, but you could obviously. I've seen other ones where they make where people have their own methods to do it.
They have it abstracted into some parent class.
So you have common functionality like setting timeouts, to do the mount and the unmount, like that sort of boilerplate stuff. There's nothing wrong with creating something that extends React component and making all your classes extend
I was
from
going
that.
to also ask that.
So you
So
would do
really,
that.
That's probably the best thing. You should do
Sometimes,
that.
yeah, it depends on what it is. I think obviously, this class syntax, a lot of JavaScript people will yell at you because they think it's not what you're supposed to be doing with JavaScript. So like a lot of times I'll favor maybe composition over that. But for some of this stuff and, this default stuff that you're going to want in every React component.
How would you do something like composition in this?
I mean, I just include methods, right? So just use external methods. Right, so if I have other methods defined, so I have a util.js file that has other methods, I just use them.
So how do you, oh, I see, okay.
So in this case where everything is in the global scope, everything is just everywhere, if I was actually using some sort of modules or whatever, you'd require it and then you'd use it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just
so you can require a different class, right? You can pull it in.
Yeah.
Like essentially include.
Yeah, you could do whatever. So that's what mixins are. So you can use mixins in ES5, you can't use them in ES6. But there are a lot of mixins and stuff like that. So great, we have this thing. Now we actually want to submit the updates. And basically we're going to do this normally, if you were going to do some Ajax stuff, you do some jQuery, whatever. We're not doing jQuery, and there's this magical thing called fetch, I think I told you guys about last week, which is now a native browser implementation that's better than XHR. So XHR was always there, native JavaScript, if you wanted to send these Ajax requests. jQuery gave you this nice layer above that, $post, $get, $Ajax. Now there's a new one called fetch, which is not jQuery. That's in Chrome right now. Unfortunately, it's not in all of the other browsers, which is why I've actually included, when you notice back here, fetch and ES6 promise. These are polyfills. So you guys know what polyfills are? No. So a polyfill is basically the chunk of code, like this fetch method. Okay, so it's natively in Chrome right now. It's not in other browsers. I'm going to load fetch JavaScript, which is going to provide this fetch method in the global scope. Okay, so then I can call fetch everywhere. And so again, it's kind of like a Babel type thing where I'm making sure that it's compatible across all browsers by making sure the polyfill is there. So there's a lot of polyfills for a lot of the ES6 stuff. So it's like, okay, I want to call it, but I don't want to have to use Babel or something to transpile it. I can just add polyfills. So it actually loads that extra JavaScript in the browser to call. So I had to add these for Firefox to work.
So
otherwise,
like, where is this library of polyfills that you're getting them from? Okay, so somebody made a gem.
Hey, you use my Rails assets.
So there's actually another, I think there is a different fetch, but yeah, so it's just JavaScript. If you go to, it's literally GitHub fetch or something like that.
Cool.
There's a JavaScript polyfill for fetch, and so I'm just pulling it in using Rails assets and then requiring it in the manifest in my components. And so fetch requires this polyfill to the ES6 promise.
RailsAssets.org has a lot of JavaScript.
Yeah.
You showed
Yeah.
that.
So the same thing, I'm using pluralize to pluralize words in JavaScript because I don't have ERB and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the same thing.
Nice.
So we are going to use fetch to do this, okay? And it's really easy. I just do fetch, and let's see, I set up this update method, and oh god, let's look at my routes. Okay, I made a patch call here to update my account. So let's do that. So this is account, and basically the way that this works is you give it the URL that you want to hit, and then you give it a big options thing with a bunch of junk. And so in order to actually post, we have to do, let's see, what do we need to do? Probably method. Actually want to patch, right? Supports all the HTTP methods, which is really nice because older browsers don't. So in Rails, right, it would make a post request and then have a hidden field to call it patch. In this case, I don't have to do that. Let's see, we need to pass in some stuff. So I'm going to call this payload for now, and we're going to set this. But that's the data that we want to send to the server. And we're going to probably want some headers. So let's see, we're going to want I think that's what I want. It's not case sensitive, but whatever. Right. And so let's actually set the data. So
Content type, the same thing.
what's that? It's just a dash.
Oh no, I'm just wondering why both of those are uppercase/JSON.
I think content type is probably the only one I need, right? Except is what I'm going to get back. Is that right?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'll just add them both. So what do we want to send? Well, let's look at our controller again. Okay, well, we want params. I've got strong params because everybody loves them. I need a preference, and then I need all this other stuff, right? So you guys are experts at this. And so what do I need? I need display name. And we know how to get this, right? Display name.value. And we need two other things. Let's see, notify on answer. And this is actually daily digest. Should probably change this.
Are you going to need the CRF token?
Getting there. Props.dailydigest, and we have a ref here that's daily digest. Okay. One thing to note is that checkboxes and radio buttons are a little bit different. So in fact, we don't want the value. We actually want this thing called checked. Okay.
ANS.
Okay. Relax. So okay. I mean.
Who's doing the hunt peck over there?
Oh yeah. What am I going to do? Move lines up and down? Come on. So this looks pretty legit, right? That's kind of what we want to send to the server. And we got patch, we got body, we got headers. So you guys are ahead of the game, right? You need the CRF token. And so fortunately for us, our application.html is rendering it on the page for us.
So we just need to get it.
So we just need to get it. And this is pretty easy to do. I think of this as X. X.
I've overlooked that tag for years.
Yeah.
So I'll show you.
I'll show you. Show us, dude.
Let's go all the way to the bottom of the head. And it renders these two things, CSRF param and CSRF token. Okay, that's what that does. And that CSRF token is what we actually want to send with our request. Okay. You may be thinking, well, I've done Ajax in Rails before, and I've even done $.post, and I've never manually included this token. And you're right, because jQuery Rails automatically adds it for you. So it configures your jQuery Ajax to grab this from the document, just like I'm about to do, and send it for you.
Why is this helping if it's publicly available via the inspect method? Via inspecting the DOM.
So, I mean, this is a CSRF, which is cross-site request forging. So if somebody was coming from another site, for example, they wouldn't be able to post this form because it's got to come from this web page, right? So they have to have information available on this web page. I can obviously take it and post from the console. You know, I mean,
couldn't I take it? Couldn't you send it to me over Slack and I could post from some random site with that CSRF token?
You can, but there's another level of protection that we have though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is devise,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm going to get to in a second. But hold
That
on.
made me feel better.
Does it make you feel better? Okay, I'm going to grab this real quick. You guys didn't see that, did you? Good.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So this is what we need to do. We need to pass the token in the header.
That's not gonna work.
What's it?
That's not gonna work.
Why not?
You're missing a
Okay. So
comma.
we're going to do this. All right. This looks pretty good, right? We got our headers. We got our token. We got this from that thing we need. We're going to post. And this is returns a promise. And so we can chain a bunch of stuff. So the way that this works is I can do then, and basically this gives me the response. Okay, and I actually am going to get the JSON from it. And this is kind of funky. This response.json doesn't return a string, it returns a stream. Okay, which is effectively kind of like another promise type thing. So actually to get the JSON value from this, I have to do this twice. So this is kind of funky. So again, this is that new syntax, right? And if it's only one argument, I actually don't have to put it in parentheses. It's kind of nice. Okay. I'm going to say hooray, and I'm going to pass it. And then if there's an error, I just do catch. It's pretty nice. Okay, so theoretically, if this is successful, I'm going to get this JSON, and then I'm going to get this JSON after that, and I'm going to print it out. Okay, and that's going to update my data. Okay, looks pretty good, right? Look good to you guys? Am I losing you?
No, makes sense.
Tom, you still with me?
Yeah.
Okay. Token. So here's an error. Okay, unexpected token. That's actually pretty useful. I can actually tell what happened. It got the line wrong, but it's pretty good. Okay. Hash rockets. Hash rockets. Okay, here we go. So I've got my thing here, and let's see. I want to actually get notified on answers, or maybe I want to sizzle dizzle my nizzle. Okay, great. Probably not work appropriate. But whatever. And let's do it. Oh shit! What just happened? Okay, something bad just happened.
Unexpected token.
Yeah, so here's the answer. Unexpected token. Okay, that's not very helpful, but
That's actually probably from the response.
Yeah. So
The response is causing that error.
let's look and see what happened on the server. Okay. Invalid authenticity token. You guys know what that means?
Your phone didn't have a offline.
Kind of. So let's try
Does
something.
CSRF token not work?
No, that worked fine. Let's try something. Can I do
Is that the devise token?
actually?
It's one that usually you just like get from like a Rails form or something.
So there's something funky happening here. So if I were to actually do this in Ajax, well, I'm not going to write it out, but trust again, since you guys have done Ajax before, that if I did that in Ajax, even without the CSRF token, it would work. But it doesn't work. So there's one other thing, another magical thing that jQuery does for us, in that it actually by default includes cookies. Okay. And which fetch does not by default include cookies. And since we need the cookie because we've got a devise session going on, it needs to be able to authenticate us. So basically what we need to do is add the cookie. And there's a couple ways to do that. Basically, I only want the local cookie.
How long did it take you to figure this out?
Too long. So basically, to include the cookie, I do this, credentials, same origin, which will include only cookies for this origin. If you want to include, you know, third-party cookies as well, it's a different argument. I forget what it is. But you basically have to do that to include the cookie. It doesn't do it by default. All right. So now if I go back,
will it respond with real cookies that I can eat right now?
unfortunately not, covered in mustard. So let's try it again. Desizzle, my nizzle. Let's see what happens. Uh-oh, shit.
Oh shit. Bad what? It's a different error.
That was the same error. Param is missing, or is empty. No,
The
it's
preferences?
Param.require, it's the strong params.
well, I don't think that's the problem. So,
It is.
let's see.
Strong params is requiring the preference param is present, which it is not. Check out your logs, your Rails logs. I'm sure the params in that. Then changing of the guard.
Actually looks okay to me. But what I will do is, so all this stuff is basically some pretty common stuff that we're going to want to refactor. So that's actually what I did. So as I looked at when you guys were losing away, I have a utils thing here that actually abstracts all that out. So instead of doing this myself,
Nice, can you make this a gem?
I'm just going to do this. Okay. And the only thing I want to do is handle the JSON.
Yes.
And I'm going to leave the error as it is. So I do
you
this.
made this patch function,
Yeah, so in here I have like I made a patch
right?
function.
And it's got your,
It's actually calling post, which has all this other stuff,
it's
and
got your
then it's
default
going to call my
options.
underscore fetch. Yeah.
nice.
So this object.assign is like merging the hashes, like angular.merge or angular.extend or whatever, right? That's the
Oh, cool.
JavaScript equivalent. And
What is the object?
I don't know,
The base JavaScript object class?
sure,
What are we talking about?
probably. And then so here's my payload, and then I should get hooray, right? So let's see if this actually works. I don't know why I was getting that bad request actually.
Maybe you had to stringify. I saw you were stringifying in your base class.
Yeah, that's probably why, because I had to do that. So yeah, so now it actually worked. That's pretty cool. And so notify and answer is what I just changed. So of course, if I refresh the page, it better stay true. And it's true.
Nice.
Okay, so we built this form, and that's a very simple approach. I had more stuff in there that I didn't do. But this is kind of the workflow, I guess, a little bit for dealing with React and Rails and forms, which are fun. Yes.
Question, why doesn't your base module class thing that you made come default with React Rails if this would work on any React Rails app?
Well, the fetch method is not React. So the fetch method is ES6.
So what do other people use with React Rails to do what you're doing?
jQuery, XHR, whatever they want.
Why are we not using jQuery then?
I don't.
Because it's too big of a library, or
So I have actually jQuery in here right now. But basically the only thing that's using it is the regular Bootstrap. There is a React Bootstrap that you could use instead, and so I could have gotten rid of jQuery completely.
I could also argue that your syntax is I mean, this is better. I would say patch, URL, and the payload. That's awesome.
I mean, it's kind of nice. Obviously, like this is not the jQuery one handles way more things than mine does, right? I mean, this was just like this was a little helper thing I did. You look at jQuery, it's going to handle way more stuff, and there's more stuff that you can handle. Mine's not going to handle like a deep merge of certain things or whatever.
Production app, what would you do?
I mean, if I'm using jQuery on the app, then I would probably just use jQuery. if I'm
using jQuery, you go down this path.
I mean, I'm going to use fetch because it's nice and I don't have to use jQuery then. So, right, I mean, I didn't use any jQuery. We've got, I have more dynamic stuff in the other one. I've got stuff loading, refreshing, right? I've got, when you add an answer, right, there's a flash. I actually have an alert in here that I didn't get to that I'm not going to do right now, but like when it comes back success, it'll pop up an alert and it'll go away. Like all this stuff there's no jQuery, right? This is all React. So you don't need jQuery, if you don't want to use it. I've seen examples of people using React and jQuery. I think that's pretty bad. So there's really no need for jQuery. Fetch is really nice. I feel like that was like the one thing that like I'm not gonna go back and use XHR.
No.
So now that that's in the browsers, or at least that there's a polyfill for it, just use fetch. So
Sweet, man.
I know that was a lot.
So how do you
stuff.
Forms are a lot. So we didn't even get to like what happens when you have more than one component on the page. Because right now we just have accounts edit component, but what if we have a
Questions
sidebar?
show. Okay, so questions show, right? I'll show you. All right, Oreos. I mean, in here too, I have multiple components. So on the question show page, I have multiple components here. I will use the React Dev tools to show you. But question show is what's rendered, from the server. Is the biggest component, right? And under here, I've got, some Bootstrap stuff, and then, here's another question component, right? And the question component has a bunch of stuff. It's got this thing which handles the green flash when you add one. And then I also have a hot questions list component over here, right? And those actually have a bunch of hot questions list items over there. So this is more of the way that you would structure a React app, right?
So show me how that's done.
So
I'm being so bossy.
question show. Here's my question show component. And I'm doing this thing, okay, this is my initial data coming from the server. I am passing it into state because I want to do this live updating thing, okay? And so basically here I have, this is me, setting that timer to refresh the answers, or the answers that are for that question, right? So we showed before when you're in one browser, it reflects in the other one, like the meteor thing. This is me getting the answers from the server. Here's another fancy ES6 thing.
I was just looking at that.
We finally have string interpolation in JavaScript, which is pretty awesome. So no more manually plussing things together.
So you have to.
It's just got to be in those.
Backticks.
Yeah.
Backticks.
Yep, backticks, which is nice. Okay. And so, what am I doing here? So I initialize state with, state.answers with what I got from the server, and now whenever I fetch answers again, I'm basically just replacing the things and the answers in state with what I get from the server. So that's happening every 5 seconds, right? I'm updating the answers that are in state.
That's awesome.
And then, so when I render, right, I'm actually passing in, so here again, I'm getting everything from the state, and I'm passing them into my other components, right? And so these become props on the question component.
Do you pass them as attributes?
Those are props.
So right there, you're basically initializing within your component a question component. So is it going to look for a component called question, or is it going to just look for, so click on question at ES6 real quick. So since this, but you don't even have to define the HTML. The HTML says div there. It doesn't say question.
What do you mean?
I just didn't know if you could put question there at the first div, make that a question. So
when you have,
out that that's
so if I go to question index, right, the question show. Okay, so I'm down here. This is JSX, right? This is not HTML.
right.
Slightly different. It knows what a div is.
Yeah.
This is not an HTML element, right? So it better be a React one. And so it's going to look for a React class called question, right? That's it.
Cool.
So again, and normally if I were using actual modules, I would, if I were using ES6 modules, I'd probably have something like import question from question or something like that is really what I would have.
But since we're in React Rails,
Since everything is global, so
everything.
it's just available. Question is available globally.
Okay.
So I don't have to worry about that.
Bigger app, you're going to want to use the importing so you don't have namespace or name conflicts.
If I could type question, right? It's available globally. This is a React component, right? It's available.
You just type in question.
Yeah, it's available globally, right?
That's pretty cool.
Question.prop types,
Misspelled
right?
it. You misspelled
Whatever. Anyways, you get the drift, right?
it.
You know, here are my prop types that I define in
You get
question,
my drift,
right? These are the ones I define in
It makes it a
question.
lot easier to debug things than in Angular where you
Yeah.
have to like
So
try to get the
one of the
information.
things that maybe I haven't mentioned before and talked through with some other people is that React is way more plain JavaScript than all this other stuff, right?
Yeah.
Which is really nice.
Really nice.
So to me, I think as like becoming a better JavaScript developer, I've actually learned way more dealing with React than I learned with Angular.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
it's got so much specific language to it.
yeah. So that's how that works, right? So it looks up your question component, right? And then it passes in all this stuff as props, right? User, question, answers, on answer. So if I go to question,
Is there an issue though with the fact that in this case your props are going to be camel case because they're coming from another component, React component, whereas had you sent these props from the Rails server, they'd be underscored.
what does that matter? I mean, I'm
You're
not.
accessing in the accounts edit thing we did. You're accessing those props directly with the underscored version.
That's what I named them. I mean, this isn't. I'm not passing in a string here. I'm passing in the actual object, right? Whatever that is. That's a variable user.
What I'm saying is right here you call this unanswered, right?
Mhm.
So now if though you were sending, or let's say this was called like the question,
Mhm.
right? So the underscore question. If we had a Rails model called the question, and we in our response with JSON, it would say the underscore question and then have the question. So then in this question ES6, then click on that one. Don't you have to make a decision as to this would be the underscore question, right? You'd have to make a decision if it's going to be the underscore question or the camel case question.
I mean, it's whatever this props is just an object of stuff, right? So I call them whatever I want. So, I mean, in the case of accounts edit, okay, the other one, I had something called preference.displayName. The only reason it's called preference.displayName is because in my application controller, or my accounts controller, I called it preference, and the attribute on my preference model is display underscore name. So I'm just passing it an object, a hash of keys and values. That's all this is, right?
I'm just saying that I think there could be a situation where you want to convert the Rails underscores to camel case.
Sure.
So that it's consistent across the app.
And so basically, I think Active Model Serializers has an option to automatically do that for you. But I mean, it's whatever you call it. So it's up to you. It doesn't really matter. So I don't know if there's something else you want to look at with the show, but you know, there's more markup here. I have lots of inline styles and so on. But these transition groups is how you manage like CSS transition, and it makes it really easy by kind of this is actually kind of magical. It like knows, it's a little like Angular when you like add or remove from a collection. It like adds some classes to those things so you can do animations, and it does the same thing. So it knows when I've added a new answer to this list of answers to apply certain classes, and then I've defined like the transitions for those classes. Yeah. So basically, render answers. Okay, I have defined up here, right, which is just a list of answers. And what you do is, whenever you have a list of things in React, they basically yell at you unless you provide them like a unique key, which is like the index by or whatever in Angular ng repeats. Yeah. And so it uses this key then to know when something new has been added to the collection or something to what's being rendered. And so basically what I can do is I have these answers, and you know, if I got a new answer from the server, there's going to be an answer with a new key that wasn't there before, so it knows that this one is new. Okay. And what this transition group does is it says, using this transition name, it's going to apply the answer hyphen enter class, and then immediately after that apply the answer hyphen enter hyphen active class. And so I can define in my CSS those classes, right, and define the transition.
Is the enter and active like something you made?
Those are the defaults,
Okay.
which you can override if you want to. But those are the defaults. And the same thing, it applies actually answer leave and answer leave active states too. So then you can control the transitions. It's kind of nice. It applies the classes for you to handle that. So that's how it knows that when I you know, add a new answer, when it's added, it flashes and goes away. Right? It uses that transition group to know, hey, this is a new thing. I'm going to apply those two classes and then get rid of them. It's kind of nice.
Really nice.
I think I
Go
can
back to the code real quick.
So what does your view folder look like? You just have like a layout, and we're just rendering all these components.
nothing, because I'm rendering straight from the server. So you can do it either way, right? So those are pre-rendered components. I can have ERB and drop the components in there if I wanted to, and then I have the option of pre-rendering them or not pre-rendering them. You just pass it a flag.
So your CSS that you define there is global to the transition, not to the answer.
It's just, I mean, I just
So,
put it in here, so it's global, right?
Why did you put it in there instead of inline like you have been with everything else?
These can't be inline because they're actually classes that are being, so I'm actually styling the classes.
I see.
So if I wanted to manually handle that rendering of it, I could use inline styles to then say, okay, apply this style, apply this style, apply this style on like subsequent renders, but that would be a lot of work. So I did inline styles elsewhere because I'm lazy and I didn't feel like defining classes and then styling the classes. So I just put inline styles everywhere. I had to do it this way, so I did. I mean, in reality, what the inline styles allow you to do is you can keep them with the component, right? And if you define, so since those styles, and I think this is why they do it that way, those styles, right, when you pass in inline styles, it's a JSON object, right? You're not passing in the string, which makes it really easy if you were to, again, define your styles in JavaScript, okay, as JSON objects. Import, now if I was using modules, right, I would import, let's say I had my button component, okay? I could import my button styles.js, okay, which had my styles but in JavaScript. And then I would just apply them to the parts of the component where I need them. So now what I have is instead of CSS, which is totally global, I have locally defined scoped styles, which it goes with the component, right? And which I know is never going to impact anything else on the page.
Because it's like kind of still like at that point render SAS useless. Like you can, I mean, at that point you're using JavaScript.
Well, you JavaScript to do anything dynamic, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know how I like end this thing.
Go to QuickTime.
Here, this circle up
Right
top,
click.
just hit stop.